In this video, I wanted to review strategies for finding limits. The first step is always using direct substitution, which is just plugging in the number. And one of three outcomes will occur. The first scenario is that sometimes it just works. Plugging in the number finds us the limit. In a second situation, sometimes you get an answer divided by 0. This means that there's probably an asymptote there, but you have to check using a graph or a table. And number 3, sometimes you get 0 divided by 0, which is our indeterminate form. This one requires more work because we can't determine what the limit is yet. Let's take a look at an example of each of these situations. So my first one, for the outcome 1, is the limit as x approaches 3, x squared minus 4 over x plus 3. And when you see this, you might be thinking to factor right away, but the first thing you always try is direct substitution, because sometimes it just works. When you plug in 3 for this one, you get 3 squared minus 4 over 3 plus 3, which gives us 9 minus 4 over 6, or 5 over 5/6. And this is the limit. The limit as x approaches 3 of this function is 5 over 6. Let's take a look at an example where you find an asymptote. For this one, we have the limit as x approaches 1 of 1 over x minus 1. You try direct substitution and you get 1 over 1 minus 1, which gives us 1 over 0. This tells us that there's probably an asymptote at this point when x is equal to 1, but we have to use a table or a graph to determine that there is an asymptote there, and that the limit really does not exist. In our third situation, we get 0 over 0. An example of this is the limit as x approaches negative 1, x squared minus x minus 2 over x squared minus 2x minus 3. When you substitute in negative 1 for all the x's, you'll get 0 over 0. This is our indeterminate form. There might be a limit here, but we can't yet determine what it is. So when outcome 3 occurs, when we get 0 over 0, we have to keep working. We have to use another strategy. When you get 0 over 0, you would try one of 3 things. You'd try factoring, multiplying by the conjugate, or by using a trig identity, depending on what the function looks like. An example of a situation where you need factoring would be something like the one we talked about earlier, where you have the limit as x approaches negative 1 of x squared minus x minus 2 over x squared minus 2x minus 3. In this case, you'd factor the numerator and the denominator and cancel, and after you do that, you'd plug negative 1 back in to find the limit. This was already outlined in a previous video, so we're not going to continue that here. Another situation when you get 0 over 0 is in a case where you need to multiply by the conjugate. That would be for something like this. The limit as x approaches 4, square root x minus 2 over x minus 4. If you plugged in 4 here, you'd get 0 over 0. And this looks like a situation in which you use the strategy of multiplying by the conjugate like we learned in a previous lesson. A last situation is when you would need a trig identity. Something like this. The limit as x approaches 0 of sine x over sine 2x. This would also give you 0 over 0, and then you would need to use a trig identity to get the answer. In this course, this is beyond the scope of what we're talking about, so in this case, where you have sine x over sine 2x, we would use a graph or a table to find the answer. We're not going to use trig identities.